Pregnant with twins, my CEO husband called me nothing and left. 10 years later, he invited me to his wedding to humiliate me. I arrived in designer clothes with our sons. "Sterling, meet your children," I said as his bride screamed. "Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story." The pregnancy test trembled in my hands, Ramona Chavez, as I stared at the two pink lines that would change everything. After 3 years of marriage to Sterling Blackwood and 2 years of desperately trying to conceive, I was finally carrying his child. My heart raced with pure joy as I imagined his reaction to the news. I had planned this moment with meticulous care. Sterling's favorite dinner was warming in the oven, thick ribeye steaks from the expensive butcher shop he preferred, paired with the 1995 Bordeaux we'd been saving since our honeymoon in Europe. Candles flickered on our dining room table, casting warm light over the penthouse apartment we'd shared for 2 years in the heart of the city. Rose petals formed a heart shape around his place setting, and I'd even wrapped a tiny pair of baby shoes to present alongside the test. I was 26 years old, and I still felt incredibly lucky to be married to Sterling Blackwood. When we'd met at that charity auction 4 years ago, I was a community college student working as a caterer's assistant to afford my tuition. He was the most successful man who had ever noticed me. A Harvard-educated owner of a thriving real estate development company, and devastatingly handsome in his tailored suits. Our whirlwind courtship had felt like a fairy tale: expensive restaurants, weekend trips to his family's lake house, and a proposal that had literally taken my breath away. Tonight, I was going to tell him we were going to be parents, and our story would reach its perfect conclusion. The sound of Sterling's key in the lock made my pulse quicken with anticipation. I quickly tucked the pregnancy test behind my back, wanting to savor the moment when I saw joy spread across his handsome face. "Sterling, honey," I called out, practically vibrating with excitement. "I have the most incredible news to share with you." But the man who walked through the door wasn't the loving husband I expected. Sterling's tall, imposing frame filled the doorway, his expensive Italian suit soaked from the October rain. But it was his expression that stopped me cold. His dark eyes, usually warm when they looked at me, were now frigid as winter stones. There was something different about him tonight. Something cruel and distant I'd never seen before. "Pack your things, Ramona." His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. "I want you out of here by tomorrow morning." The pregnancy test slipped from my numb fingers. It clattered onto the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden, devastating silence. "What did you just say?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. Sterling stepped over the fallen test without even glancing down. His movements were sharp and deliberate as he loosened his silk tie, the burgundy one I'd given him for our second anniversary. "You heard me perfectly well, Ramona. This charade is over. I'm done pretending, and I'm definitely done with you." My legs felt unsteady beneath me. The romantic dinner, the candles, the rose petals, everything seemed to mock me now. "Sterling, please. There's something important I need to tell you. Nothing you could possibly say matters anymore." He brushed past me toward our bedroom, his shoulder knocking against mine with deliberate coldness. "I found someone who actually deserves to be with a successful man like me. Someone who isn't." He paused at the bedroom doorway, turning to look at me with undisguised disgust. "Someone who isn't beneath me." Each word was carefully chosen to wound. I pressed my hand to my chest, struggling to breathe as the room seemed to spin. "Beneath me, Sterling? We're married. We took vows in front of your family, my family. We promised to love each other through everything." His laughter was sharp and bitter. "Vows to you?" Sterling began throwing his clothes into expensive leather luggage. Each movement was aggressive and dismissive. "Ramona, look at yourself. Really, look. You come from the barrio. Your family works in factories and cleans houses for a living. You barely finished community college with a degree that means nothing in the real world. These were the things he'd once claimed to love about me, my authentic background, my humble family, my down-to-earth nature. Now they were weapons in his hands. But you said you loved me exactly as I am, I whispered. You said my family was warm and real, unlike the cold people in your social circle. You said none of that other stuff mattered. I lied. Sterling's voice was flat, emotionless. I was young and thought maybe I could make something out of you, clean you up, teach you how to act around important people. But you can't polish trash, can you, Ramona? I sank onto our king-sized bed, the bed where we'd made love just 3 nights ago, where he'd whispered promises about our future together. How can you say these things to me? This isn't you, Sterling. This isn't the man I fell in love with. This is exactly who I am. Sterling spun around, his face twisted with something that looked like hatred. I'm being honest. For the first time in this entire relationship. You want to know what's cruel? Being trapped with someone who will never be good enough, having to pretend that you belong in my world when everyone at my office whispers about how I'm married down. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I picked up the pregnancy test from the floor with shaking hands. Maybe this would change everything. Maybe when he knew about the baby, the man I'd fallen in love with would return. I'm pregnant, Sterling. We're going to have a baby. Sterling stopped packing. For one brief, desperate moment, I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even a hint of the man I'd married. But when he spoke, his voice was even colder than before. Not my problem. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean, not your problem? This is your child. Our child. My child? Sterling's laugh was vicious, cutting. With you? I seriously doubt it's even mine. You probably got knocked up by some guy from your old neighborhood, and now you're trying to pin it on me. The accusation was so shocking, so completely unfounded that I couldn't even respond. I stared at this stranger, wearing my husband's face, wondering when everything had gone so horribly wrong. But even if it is mine, Sterling continued, zipping up his suitcase with violent force. I don't want it. I don't want any reminder of the biggest mistake I ever made, marrying you. I doubled over as if he'd punched me in the stomach. My free hand moved instinctively to protect my still flat belly. Please, I whispered through my tears. Please don't do this. We can work through this. I love you so much. Your love means nothing to me. Sterling grabbed his suitcase and headed for the door, not even looking back at my crumpled form. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce. Don't even think about trying to contact me. Don't ask for money. Don't ask for anything. You're nothing to me now, Ramona. You always were nothing, and you always will be nothing. The door slammed shut with such force that our wedding picture fell from the wall, the glass shattering across the floor in 1,000 glittering pieces. I collapsed beside the broken frame, clutching the pregnancy test to my chest as sobs racked me. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and the rain grew heavier. The candles still flickered on the dining table, and the heart made of rose petals remained untouched, a mocking reminder of dreams that had just been destroyed. As I knelt among the shattered glass of our wedding photo, holding the proof of new life in my hands, I had no idea that this moment of complete devastation would become the foundation for a transformation that would make Sterling's cruelty the biggest mistake of his life. For months after Sterling left, I stood in front of the cracked mirror in my studio apartment's tiny bathroom, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at me. Dark circles ringed my once bright eyes, telling the story of too many sleepless nights spent worrying about bills, medical expenses, and an uncertain future. My maternity clothes, thrift store finds and hand-me-downs from my sister Iris, hung loosely on my frame. Despite carrying a baby, I'd actually lost weight because food had become a luxury I couldn't always afford. The apartment was a universe away from the penthouse I'd shared with Sterling. Located in the most dangerous part of the city, where sirens wailed through the night and gunshots occasionally echoed off the thin walls, it was all I could afford on my wages from 3 part-time jobs. The single room served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen. A hot plate sat on a card table that doubled as my dining area, and my bed was a mattress on the floor that I'd bought secondhand for $40. Sterling's divorce had been swift and merciless. His team of expensive lawyers had somehow managed to prove I wasn't entitled to any of our shared assets. Everything had been in Sterling's name from the beginning. I'd walked away from 3 years of marriage with a single suitcase of clothes and a heart full of shattered dreams. I pressed my hand to my rounded belly, feeling the baby move restlessly inside me. At 6 months pregnant, I was working as many hours as my body could handle, cleaning offices from midnight to 6 a.m., waitressing at a diner during lunch hours, and doing alterations for a seamstress in the evenings. The work was backbreaking, but the combined salary barely covered my $400 monthly rent and the cheapest groceries I could find. "I'm sorry, little one," I whispered to my unborn child. "I know this isn't the life I promised you, but I'm going to do better somehow." A sharp knock at my door interrupted my quiet moment. I knew that knock. Mrs. Patterson, my landlord, and I was 4 days late on rent. "Mrs. Blackwood." The elderly woman's voice was harsh through the thin door. "I know you're in there." I took a deep breath and opened the door, trying to summon a smile. "Mrs. Patterson, I was just about to come see you. I'll have the rest of the rent by Friday. I promise." The landlord's eyes narrowed as they swept over my obviously pregnant form. "You said that last month, girl. I'm running a business here, not a charity for unwed mothers." "I'm not unwed. I'm divorced," I said quietly. "And please, just give me until Friday. I'm picking up extra shifts." "Friday, then you're out. And next time, you better think twice before getting yourself knocked up by some man who won't stick around." Mrs. Patterson's words stung because they were so close to the truth, even if she had the facts wrong. After the landlord left, I sank onto my mattress and buried my face in my hands. I had called my family for help. Iris sent what little money she could spare from her job as a hotel housekeeper, but Iris had 3 kids of her own to support. Our mother, who worked double shifts at a textile factory, had already given me her entire savings, $230. My stomach growled loudly, reminding me that I'd skipped breakfast to save money. I opened my nearly empty refrigerator and pulled out a container of rice and beans, the cheapest meal I could make that still provided some nutrition for the baby. As I heated it on the hot plate, tears began to fall. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I should be in a beautiful nursery right now, surrounded by love and excitement about becoming a mother. Instead, I was alone, broke, and terrified about bringing a child into this world with nothing to offer. 2 months later, I was scrubbing floors at the Meridian office complex when the first contraction hit me like a lightning bolt. I was in the executive washroom on the 20th floor, alone, except for the sound of my own labored breathing echoing off the marble walls. "No," I whispered, panic rising in my chest as another contraction gripped me. "Please, not yet. It's too early." I was only 34 weeks pregnant. The baby wasn't supposed to come for another month and a half, but the contractions kept coming faster and stronger with each wave. I managed to call Iris from the office phone, my voice shaking with fear and pain. "Iris, something's wrong. The baby's coming and I'm at work." "Stay exactly where you are, Ramona. I'm calling an ambulance and coming to get you right now." Iris's voice was fierce with protective love. The paramedics found me collapsed in the hallway outside the washroom, clutching my belly as another contraction tore through me. "Ma'am, how far along are you?" the EMT asked as they lifted me onto a gurney. 34 weeks, I gasped. "But there's something else. I think there might be 2 babies." The ride to County General Hospital was a blur of sirens and pain. Iris met them at the emergency room, her face pale with worry as she ran alongside my gurney. "The babies!" I gasped, reaching for my sister's hand. Iris, what if something's wrong with them? What if they're not okay? They're going to be fine, Iris said firmly, though I could see the fear in her eyes. You're going to be fine. We're going to get through this together. The emergency room was chaos. Gunshot victims, overdoses, and families crying in languages I didn't recognize. It took Iris arguing with 3 different nurses before they finally took me back to a delivery room. Twins, confirmed Dr. Williams, a tired-looking resident who couldn't have been much older than me herself. And they're coming whether we're ready or not. Are you prepared to be a mother of 2? I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question. Prepared? I had no insurance, no money for hospital bills, no nursery waiting at home. I had nothing except fierce love for these babies I hadn't even met yet. But as the next contraction hit, I realized that preparation was a luxury I couldn't afford. Ready or not, my children were coming into the world tonight. 14 hours later, at 3:47 a.m. on a cold February morning, Alden Miguel Chavez entered the world screaming at the top of his lungs, as if announcing his intention to fight for everything life had to offer. 2 minutes later, his brother Miles Antonio followed more quietly, but I could see the same determination in his dark eyes. They're beautiful, Ramona, Iris whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her nephews. Look at them. They're perfect. I held my sons for the first time, one in each arm, and felt something shift deep inside my chest. They were so small. Alden barely 5 pounds, Miles just over 5. But they were fighters. Alden had Sterling's strong jaw and commanding presence even as a newborn, while Miles had inherited my gentler features, but with an unmistakable strength in his tiny grip. I'm sorry, I whispered to them as they slept in my arms. I'm sorry I can't give you everything you deserve right now, but I promise you this. I will never give up. I will never stop fighting for you. You deserve so much more than this. And somehow, someway, I'm going to make sure you get it. Iris squeezed my shoulder gently. What are you going to do about Sterling? I mean, those are his sons. He should know. My voice was firm despite my exhaustion. He made his choice when he called me nothing and walked away. These beautiful boys are not nothing, and they don't need a father who would see them as burdens instead of blessings. But the money, Ramona. You can't raise 2 babies alone with no help. I looked down at Alden and Miles, both sleeping peacefully despite being born into poverty and uncertainty. I won't be alone. I have them and they have me. We're a family now. That's what matters. 3 weeks later, the reality of caring for twin newborns in a studio apartment with no money and no help was overwhelming beyond anything I had imagined. The babies cried in shifts, ensuring I never got more than an hour of sleep at a time. My body ached from childbirth, but I couldn't afford to take time off work. I was back to cleaning offices within a week of giving birth, strapping the twins to my chest in second-hand baby carriers. I remember one particularly brutal night. Both babies had been crying for 3 straight hours, and I hadn't slept in 36 hours. I found myself sobbing right along with them. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment at 2 a.m., a baby in each arm, wondering if I was strong enough for this impossible task. That's when I looked down at Alden, who had suddenly stopped crying and was staring up at me with those serious dark eyes that seemed far too wise for a newborn. Something in his gaze seemed to communicate directly with my heart. We are counting on you, Mama. Don't give up on us. You're right, I whispered to him, then looked at Miles, who was also watching me intently with Sterling's dark eyes, but my own gentle expression. You're both right. I can't fall apart. You two are the best things that ever happened to me, and I'm going to prove to the world and to myself that we don't need anybody else. I wiped my tears and stood up, settling both boys in the crib Iris had found at a yard sale. Starting tomorrow, we begin again. I don't know how yet, but I promise you both. Your mama is going to be somebody, and you're going to grow up knowing that you can be anything you want to be, no matter where you come from. As if they understood, both babies settled down and fell asleep. I stood over their crib for a long time, watching them breathe, and felt something I hadn't experienced since the night Sterling left me: hope. It was just a tiny spark, barely alive after months of despair. But it was there, growing stronger as I watched my sons sleep. I had no money, no husband, no support system beyond my overworked family. But I had something Sterling would never understand. I had love, and I had determination that had been forged in the fire of absolute necessity. "Sterling Blackwood," I whispered into the darkness. "Wherever you are with your perfect new life, you have no idea what you threw away. But someday, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you that these boys and I are worth more than you ever imagined." Outside my window, the first hints of dawn were beginning to touch the sky. I sat down in the broken recliner Iris had found for me and closed my eyes for a few minutes of rest before the boys woke up again. I didn't know it yet, but this was the night everything began to change. This was the night Ramona Chavez stopped being a victim and started becoming the woman who would one day show Sterling Blackwood the true meaning of regret. 5 years after the twins were born, I wiped flour from my hands and glanced at the kitchen clock. 4:30 a.m. In the small backyard of our rented two-bedroom house, I could see Alden and Miles sleeping peacefully in the room they shared, surrounded by the scent of fresh tamales, pozole, and tres leches cake that would feed the Martinez family reunion later today. The kitchen counter was covered with aluminum containers, 50 dozen tamales, 3 gallons of pozole, 2 dozen enchilada casseroles, and 5 cakes. This single catering order would bring in $800, more than I used to make in a month during those desperate early days. What had started as pure survival had evolved into something unexpected. During the twins' first year, when I was working 3 jobs just to keep our tiny apartment, I'd begun cooking extra portions of my grandmother's recipes and selling them to coworkers. My supervisor at the office cleaning company, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been the first to pay me $20 for a tray of homemade tamales. "Ramona, these are better than my own mother's," Mrs. Rodriguez had said. "Can you make them for my daughter's quinceañera?" That quinceañera, 30 guests, $150 total payment, had been my first real catering job. Word spread through the Latino community faster than I'd expected. Within 6 months, I was getting calls every weekend. Within a year, I'd saved enough to quit 2 of my 3 jobs and focus on building what I'd started calling Ramona's Kitchen. Now at 28, I had clients booked 3 months in advance. I'd obtained my business license, built relationships with reliable suppliers, and even hired 2 part-time assistants for larger events. More importantly, I'd moved the twins to a safe neighborhood where they could play outside without my constant worry. "Mama, it smells like heaven in here," Alden said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with his hair standing up at odd angles. At 5 years old, he was already showing signs of the natural leadership that would define him. Always the first to wake up, always checking on his quieter brother, Miles. "Good morning, Mijo. Did we wake you up?" "Miles is still sleeping, but I wanted to help." Alden climbed onto the step stool I had bought him and began carefully arranging napkins in the delivery boxes. Even at 5, he understood that this work was important, that it was how we'd built our new life. The transformation hadn't been easy. It had required 18-hour days, learning business skills through library books and community college night courses, and more exhaustion than I had known was possible. But every sacrifice had been worth it to see my sons thriving. Miles appeared in the doorway, quieter and more observant than his brother. "Mama, are we rich now?" The question made me smile. "We are not rich, sweetheart, but we're secure. We have enough. And more importantly, we have each other. Mrs. Henderson at daycare says you're an entrepreneur." I replied, "That means someone who builds their own business." "Like a boss?" Alden asked, his eyes lighting up. "Exactly like a boss. Your mama is the boss of her own company now." Later that morning, after delivering the Martinez order, I drove to my appointment with Rosa Castillo, who wanted to hire me for what could be my biggest contract yet, a wedding for 200 guests with a budget of $5,000. The Castillo family lived in Riverside Hills, the wealthy neighborhood where I had once lived with Sterling. As I parked my used Honda in the circular driveway, I felt a familiar flutter of nerves. These consultations with affluent clients still reminded me of the world I'd briefly inhabited, a world of marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and people who measured worth by appearances. But I was different now. I wore my best business suit, not expensive, but clean and professional, and carried myself with the confidence of someone who'd built something real with her own hands. Mrs. Castillo greeted me at the door, an elegant woman in her 50s, who managed to be both wealthy and genuinely warm. "Miss Chavez, please come in. I've heard wonderful things about your work." We sat in a living room that was bigger than my entire house, discussing menu options and logistics. I had learned to navigate these conversations with professional confidence, never intimidated, but always respectful. "Your references are exceptional," Mrs. Castillo said, reviewing the portfolio I had prepared. "The Hernandez anniversary party, the Torres quinceañera. The photos of your food are absolutely beautiful." "Thank you. I take pride in both taste and presentation. Every event reflects the family's personality and traditions." Mrs. Castillo smiled. "I have to ask, how did you get started? You seem so young to have built such a reputation." I had prepared for this question. "I started cooking out of necessity when my sons were babies. I'm a single mother, and I needed to find a way to support them while staying home. What began as survival became passion." Single mother. "How old are your children?" "Twin boys, 5 years old. They're the reason I work so hard. I want them to have opportunities one didn't have." Mrs. Castillo's expression softened. "That's admirable. Building a business while raising twins alone. That takes incredible strength." Strength. I had heard that word so often now, but it still felt strange. I didn't feel strong most days. I felt tired, worried, constantly pushing myself to do more, be more, achieve more. But maybe that was what strength actually looked like, not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear stop you. "Can you handle an event this size?" Mrs. Castillo asked. 200 guests is quite ambitious." "Absolutely. I work with a network of trusted assistants for larger events, and I can provide references from similar occasions." My pulse quickened, but I kept my voice steady. This contract would change everything. The deposit alone would let me put a down payment on a house. "Wonderful. I'd like to book you for June 15th. As I drove home with the signed contract, my mind raced with possibilities. This success would lead to more referrals, bigger events, maybe even the opportunity to open an actual restaurant someday. But more than business growth, I felt something deeper, vindication. Sterling had called me nothing. He'd said I came from nothing and would always be nothing. But tonight, I would go home to my sons in their safe house with a contract that would earn me more in one weekend than Sterling had ever given me in monthly allowances. That evening, after Alden and Miles were asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my business accounting spread before me. In 5 years, I'd gone from 3 part-time jobs that barely paid rent to a business that was booked solid through the summer. My credit score had improved enough to qualify for a small business loan. I was even taking business classes at the community college on Saturday mornings. The phone rang, interrupting my calculations. "Ramona, it's Carmen Rodriguez from St. Mary's Academy." My heart leapt. Carmen was the admissions counselor at the private school I'd been dreaming of sending Alden and Miles to. The same school where wealthy families sent their children for the best education money could buy. "I have good news," Carmen continued. "We've reviewed your application for financial aid and we can offer Alden and Miles partial scholarships for the fall semester. Combined with your contribution, we can make this work." My eyes filled with tears. I'd been working toward this goal for 2 years, saving every extra penny and building my credit so I could qualify for the remaining tuition costs. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you so much." After hanging up, I walked to the boys' bedroom and stood in the doorway watching them sleep. Alden was sprawled across his bed with characteristic confidence while Miles curled up neatly under his covers, clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. "St. Mary's Academy," I whispered to them. "You're going to get the best education, and you're going to have every opportunity to succeed." I thought about Sterling, probably sleeping in some expensive bed somewhere, never knowing that he had two brilliant sons who were about to attend one of the city's most prestigious schools, never knowing that the woman he called trash was building something beautiful from the ground up. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sterling had married me when I was young and uncertain, then discarded me when I needed him most. But his cruelty had forced me to discover strength I'd never known I possessed. As I returned to my business planning, I felt that familiar fire burning in my chest, not the desperate panic of the early days, but something focused and purposeful. I was no longer the heartbroken woman Sterling had left behind. I was Ramona Chavez, successful entrepreneur and devoted mother, and I was just getting started. Sterling had thrown away something precious without recognizing its value. But I had taken that discarded life and built it into something extraordinary. The best part was that he had no idea what he'd lost or what I'd become in his absence. 10 years after Sterling's abandonment, I, Ramona Chavez, stood in my corner office overlooking the city's business district, reviewing the morning schedule on my tablet. Elegantia Events, the company that had grown from my kitchen table catering business, now occupied the entire 15th floor of the prestigious Wellington building. The brass nameplate on my mahogany desk read Ramona Chavez, President and CEO, and the view through my floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city where I'd once struggled to survive. At 36, I had transformed not just my circumstances, but myself. The uncertain young woman who had once tried desperately to fit into Sterling's world was gone. In her place stood a confident businesswoman who belonged in any room she entered. Not because someone else granted her access, but because she'd earned her place through talent, innovation, and relentless work. Mrs. Chavez, my assistant, Jennifer, appeared in the doorway. "The Patterson family is here for their consultation. Send them in, please, and remind me, I need to leave by 4:30 today for Alden and Miles's academic awards ceremony." The Patterson consultation went smoothly. They wanted Elegantia Events to coordinate their son's wedding, a lavish affair with 300 guests, a budget of $150,000, and every detail customized to perfection. 5 years ago, such a contract would have seemed impossible. Now, it was Tuesday's second appointment. "Your portfolio is remarkable," Mrs. Patterson said, flipping through the leather-bound album showcasing my work. "The governor's charity gala last month was absolutely stunning, and I heard you coordinated the Sinclair merger celebration. Everyone's still talking about those ice sculptures that spelled out the company names." I smiled graciously. "Each event is unique to our client's vision. We specialize in creating experiences that reflect your family's values and celebrate your most important moments." The truth was, Elegantia Events had become the premier luxury event planning company in the region. My combination of artistic vision, flawless execution, and genuine care for my clients had built a reputation that kept me booked solid for the next 20 months. I employed 18 full-time staff members and worked with a network of trusted vendors who competed for the privilege of being associated with my events. But more than the business success, what filled me with the deepest satisfaction was watching my sons flourish in ways that exceeded even my highest hopes. At 4:15, I left the office early to attend Alden and Miles's awards ceremony at St. Mary's Academy. The private school had been the best investment I'd ever made, not just for the education, but for the confidence it had given my sons. I arrived at the prestigious campus and was struck by how natural it felt to walk through the marble hallways lined with portraits of distinguished alumni. The first time I'd brought the boys here for their entrance interview, I'd felt like an imposter. Now, as one of the school's major donors and a member of the Parent Advisory Board, I belonged here as much as anyone. "Ramona!" Sarah Henderson, mother of one of Miles's classmates, waved me over. "I was hoping to catch you. Did you get my message about the spring fundraising committee?" "Yes, I'll be happy to coordinate the silent auction," I replied. "Elegantia Events will handle it pro bono." Sarah beamed. "You're incredible. I don't know how you manage everything, your company, the boys, all your community involvement. The ceremony began, and I found my seat in the third row, reserved for families of honor students. I watched with immense pride as both my sons were called to the stage, but for very different achievements that reflected their distinct personalities. Alden was named Student Council President for the upcoming year, the youngest student ever elected to the position. At 10 years old, he possessed a natural charisma that drew people to him, combined with an ethical compass that I had worked hard to instill. He was the kind of leader who inspired others not through dominance but through genuine care for their welfare. Miles received the Creative Arts Excellence Award for a short story he'd written about a single mother who built a business empire while raising twins. His teacher had submitted it to a national youth writing contest where it had placed second among thousands of entries. Miles had inherited my emotional intelligence, but combined it with an artistic soul that saw beauty and meaning in everything around him. When they returned to their seats, Alden leaned over and whispered, "Thanks for being here, Mom. I know you had important meetings today." "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," I whispered back, meaning every word. Miles, more observant than his brother, studied my face carefully. "Are you proud of us?" The question caught me off guard. "Sweetheart, I'm so proud of you both that I sometimes can't breathe from the joy of it. You've become such remarkable young men." "Good," Miles said seriously, "because we're really proud of you, too." Tommy Henderson's mom said, "You're the most successful woman she knows." Later that evening, after celebrating at the boys' favorite restaurant, I tucked them into bed in their beautiful home in Riverside Hills. The house was a testament to how far we'd come: 5 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen where I still loved to experiment with new recipes, and a backyard where the boys could play soccer with their friends. "Mom," Miles said as I kissed his forehead. "Can I ask you something that might be hard to answer?" I sat on the edge of his bed, recognizing his serious tone. "Of course, sweetheart. Do you ever think about our father? Not like missing him or anything," he added quickly, "but wondering what his life is like now?" The question was more complex than Miles probably realized. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not the way I used to." "How did you used to think about him?" Alden asked, appearing in the doorway in his pajamas. I considered how to answer honestly without burdening them with my pain. For a long time, I thought about him with hurt and anger. He'd made me feel worthless, and I carried that feeling around like a heavy stone. "But not anymore?" Miles asked. "No, not anymore. Now, when I think about him, I mostly feel curious. I wonder if he's happy, if he ever thinks about the choices he made, if he knows what he missed by not being part of your lives." Alden climbed onto the bed beside his brother. "Do you think he knows about us? About what we've accomplished?" I pulled both boys close, overwhelmed by their maturity and insight. "I think there are probably moments when he wonders what happened to us. But honestly, it doesn't matter anymore whether he knows or not. We built something beautiful without him. Sometimes I wonder if we would have been different if he'd stayed," Miles said quietly. "Different how?" "Maybe not as close to you. Maybe not as strong, I guess. Like we had to learn to take care of each other because it was just us 3. I felt tears prick my eyes. "You know what? I think you're absolutely right. The 3 of us became a team because we had to, and that made us stronger than most families ever get to be." Plus, Alden added with 10-year-old pragmatism, if he was the kind of person who could leave his pregnant wife, we probably wouldn't have liked him very much anyway. As I turned out the lights and headed to my own room, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. 10 years ago, I'd been broken, desperate, and convinced I was nothing. Tonight, I was the CEO of a successful company, the mother of 2 extraordinary children, and a respected member of my community. I'd proven Sterling wrong in every possible way. But more importantly, I'd proven something to myself, that worth isn't determined by someone else's opinion, no matter how cruelly they express it. Standing at my bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, I allowed myself to imagine what Sterling's life looked like now. Was he happy? Had he achieved everything he thought he wanted when he'd thrown away his family for someone better? The questions no longer came from a place of pain or even curiosity about reconciliation. They came from a place of genuine wonder about the path not taken. Sterling had made his choice based on what he thought would bring him happiness and success. I had made mine based on love and responsibility. Looking at the life I'd built, the sons I'd raised, and the respect I'd earned in my community, I knew without a doubt which choice had led to real fulfillment. I had learned that the best response to cruelty isn't revenge. It's building a life so meaningful and joyful that the person who tried to diminish you becomes irrelevant to your happiness. Sterling had called me nothing, but his opinion had long since lost any power to hurt me. Ramona Chavez was everything she'd chosen to become, and that transformation had been accomplished entirely through her own courage, love, and refusal to accept someone else's definition of her worth. Sterling Blackwood stood on the balcony of his downtown penthouse, surveying the city below with the satisfaction of a man who believed he owned everything within sight. At 38, he had methodically achieved every goal he'd set for himself: a real estate empire worth millions, political connections that opened doors throughout the state, and now the perfect woman to complete his carefully constructed image. But lately, in quiet moments like this, Sterling found his mind wandering to places he'd thought he'd permanently closed off. The silence of his perfect life had begun to feel hollow, and he couldn't shake the nagging sense that something essential was missing from all his success. "Darling, the wedding planner is here," Blythe Hayes called from inside the apartment, her voice carrying that breathless quality that had initially charmed him. "She wants to go over the final guest list." Sterling straightened his Italian silk tie and walked back into the living room, where Blythe was arranging herself elegantly on their white leather sofa. At 28, she embodied everything he'd convinced himself he wanted: blonde, beautiful, and from exactly the right kind of family. Her father owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Southeast. Her mother sat on the boards of 3 prestigious charities, and Blythe herself moved through high society with the effortless grace of someone born to privilege. She was, Sterling had told himself repeatedly, his perfect match. Unlike his first marriage, this relationship made sense on paper. 2 successful people from similar backgrounds building a life that would be the envy of everyone who mattered. Mr. Blackwood, the wedding planner, a severe woman named Ms. Chin, looked up from her tablet. "We have confirmations from 243 guests so far." The mayor's office called to confirm his attendance, and Senator Morrison's wife will be representing their family. Sterling nodded with satisfaction. This wedding would be the social event of the season. 500 guests at the Grand Belmont Hotel, with dinner catered by the city's most exclusive restaurant and entertainment provided by a jazz quartet that usually performed for heads of state. More importantly, it would be public validation of his choices. Everyone who mattered would witness his triumph. Proof that he had chosen correctly when he'd ended his first divorce for something better. "What about the press coverage?" Sterling asked. 3 newspapers will cover the society pages, plus Lifestyle magazine wants to do a 6-page feature spread, Ms. Chin replied efficiently. "This will definitely be one of the most photographed weddings of the year." That was exactly what Sterling wanted. But even as he planned this public celebration, he couldn't escape the strange restlessness that had been growing stronger over the past few months. Success, he was discovering, felt different than he'd expected, emptier, somehow. "Oh, Sterling," Blythe said suddenly, examining her perfectly manicured nails with the casual attention she gave most things. "Didn't you mention wanting to invite that woman from your past? Your first wife?" Sterling's jaw tightened at the reminder. "Yes, Ramona Chavez." "Have we sent her invitation yet?" The truth was, Sterling had been thinking about Ramona more often than he cared to admit. Not with longing or regret, he'd convinced himself he felt neither, but with a nagging curiosity about what had happened to her after he'd left. 10 years of complete silence. No attempts at contact, no requests for money, nothing. The absence of drama had been exactly what he'd wanted, but lately it felt almost unsettling. "I have her address here," Ms. Chin consulted her list. "For 12, Maple Street, apartment 3B. Shall I add her to the formal invitation list?" "Absolutely." Sterling's smile was cold and calculating. Make sure she gets the full invitation package, the embossed stationery, the silk envelope, everything. I want her to understand exactly what kind of event this is. The decision wasn't entirely rational. Sterling knew there was something driving him to invite Ramona that he couldn't quite name. Part curiosity, part cruelty, and perhaps part need to prove to himself that his choices had been correct. Blythe looked puzzled, her blue eyes showing the first spark of genuine interest she'd displayed all morning. Why invite an ex-wife to your wedding? Isn't that asking for drama? Sterling walked to the windows again, his hands clasped behind his back. Let's call it closure, darling. Ramona needs to see what real success looks like. She needs to understand the difference between her world and mine. But even as he said it, Sterling wasn't entirely sure what he expected to accomplish. In his mind, Ramona was frozen in time, the broken, desperate woman he'd left behind 10 years ago. He imagined her still struggling, still marked by the poverty and failure he'd predicted for her. Inviting her would be a final demonstration of how right he'd been to leave, how much better his life had become without her dragging him down. Where is Maple Street? Blythe asked, wrinkling her nose delicately. I don't think I've ever heard of it. The East Side, Sterling replied dismissively. Definitely not your social circle, sweetheart. Ms. Chin cleared her throat diplomatically. Actually, Mr. Blackwood, I should mention I had to do some research to find the correct address. There are several Ramona Chavezes in the city. The information I found suggests she may have moved around quite a bit over the years. Perfect, Sterling said with satisfaction. That's exactly what I expected. But something in Ms. Chen's tone suggested there was more to the story. Sir, there was also some mention of children. Sterling's expression hardened. That's not my concern. The conversation was interrupted by Blythe's phone ringing with the distinctive tone she'd assigned to her wedding dress fittings. As she took the call, chattering about alterations and accessories, Sterling found his mind drifting again. Children. The word stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. Not regret exactly, but a strange hollowness he'd never quite managed to fill despite all his success. 3 days later, I was reviewing vendor contracts in my office when Jennifer knocked on the door, holding a cream-colored envelope with obvious curiosity. This came by special delivery, Jennifer said, setting the envelope on my desk. Very fancy, hand-delivered by a courier in a tuxedo, if you can believe that. I glanced at the envelope and immediately recognized the expensive paper stock and formal calligraphy. But it was the return address that made my blood run cold, Mr. and Mrs. Sterling Blackwood. But that wasn't right. Sterling wasn't married. As far as I knew, he was still single. Unless... With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and pulled out the thick embossed invitation card. Mr. Sterling Harrison Blackwood and Miss Blythe Marie Hayes. Request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. Saturday, the 15th of June at 6 o'clock in the evening. The Grand Belmont Hotel. Reception to follow. Black tie required. I stared at the invitation for a long moment, my heart pounding. Sterling was getting married. After 10 years of silence, he had chosen to invite me to witness his new beginning. But why? I turned the invitation over and found a handwritten note in Sterling's familiar scroll. Ramona, I thought you might enjoy seeing how well some people recover from their mistakes. I hope you'll be able to attend. It should be quite an educational experience for you. SB. The casual cruelty of the note hit me like a physical blow. Even after all these years, even with all my success and transformation, Sterling still saw me as someone beneath him, someone to be humiliated and dismissed. I set the invitation down carefully and walked to my window, looking out at the city I now knew so well. Sterling had no idea who I'd become. In his mind, I was probably still that broken woman he'd left behind, struggling in poverty and failure. This invitation wasn't about celebrating his happiness. It was about forcing me to witness what he perceived as my continued misery compared to his triumph. Mrs. Chavez. Jennifer's voice was concerned. Are you all right? You look upset. I turned back to my assistant, forcing a smile. I'm fine. Just an invitation from someone I used to know. Must be quite someone to send such an elaborate invitation. Oh, he thinks he is, I said quietly. After Jennifer left, I sat back down at my desk and read the invitation again. The Grand Belmont Hotel. I'd coordinated events there many times. Black tie required. I had a closet full of designer gowns now. The 15th of June. I was currently free that evening. Sterling expected me to either not show up at all or to arrive looking shabby and out of place, confirming his opinion that I'd never amounted to anything. He wanted to parade his success in front of me, to prove to himself and his new society friends that he'd been right to discard me. What Sterling didn't know was that Ramona Chavez was no longer the woman who could be intimidated or humiliated. She was no longer someone who would shrink away from a challenge or hide from confrontation. I picked up my phone and dialed Iris's number. Iris, it's me. Are you free for lunch today? I have something interesting to show you. An hour later, Iris and I sat in our favorite cafe, the wedding invitation spread between us on the small table. Iris's eyes were wide with disbelief as she read Sterling's handwritten note for the third time. I cannot believe this man, Iris said, her voice rising with indignation. After 10 years of silence, he invites you to his wedding just to humiliate you. What kind of person does that? The kind of person who needs to prove he was right about everything, I said calmly, sipping my coffee. He thinks I'm still that desperate woman who begged him not to leave. You're not going, right? Iris's voice was firm. You're going to ignore this nonsense and throw the invitation where it belongs. I was quiet for a long moment, studying the elegant script on the invitation. Actually, I think I am going to go. Ramona, no. Iris reached across the table and grabbed my sister's hand. Why would you put yourself through that? You've built such a beautiful life. Why give him the satisfaction? Because, I said slowly, a smile beginning to form on my lips. He's expecting to see the old Ramona, the broken, poor woman he left behind. He has no idea who I've become. Iris's expression shifted from concern to understanding. You want to show him what he lost. I want to show him exactly what he threw away when he called me nothing. My voice was steady and sure. I want him to see Alden and Miles, his sons that he never wanted. I want him to see the successful businesswoman I became. The life I built from the ashes he left behind. The twins. Iris breathed. You're going to bring the boys? They're 10 years old, Iris. Old enough to handle a formal event and definitely old enough to see their mother celebrated for who she really is. My eyes sparkled with purpose. Sterling thinks he's setting up my humiliation. Instead, he's giving me the perfect opportunity to show him the truth. Iris was quiet for a moment. Then a slow smile spread across her face. You know what? You're absolutely right. That man has no idea what's coming for him. None at all, I agreed. He's about to learn that when you throw away something precious, you don't get to decide what it becomes in your absence. I folded the invitation carefully and put it back in my purse. I need to start planning. The boys will need formal wear, and I'll need something spectacular to wear. This is going to be expensive, Iris warned. Are you sure you want to spend that kind of money just to prove a point? I thought about all the years of struggle, all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was strong enough to raise my sons alone, all the times I doubted myself because of Sterling's cruel words. Iris, I said firmly, there's no amount of money I wouldn't spend to show Sterling Blackwood exactly who he's dealing with now. As we left the cafe, I felt that familiar fire burning in my chest. the same sense of purpose that had carried me through night school, through building my business, through every challenge of the past 10 years. Sterling thought he was orchestrating my humiliation. Instead, he'd just given me the stage for my greatest triumph. The broken woman he'd discarded was long gone. In her place stood Ramona Chavez, and she was ready to show the world exactly what Sterling Blackwood had been foolish enough to throw away. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose that felt almost electric. As I prepared breakfast for Alden and Miles, my mind was already working through the logistics of what I'd privately begun calling Operation Vindication. Sterling's wedding was in exactly 3 weeks. Enough time to orchestrate the perfect entrance, but not so much time that I could second-guess myself. "Mom, you seem different today," Alden observed, looking up from his cereal with the sharp perception that had always made him an exceptional student. "Excited different. Did something big happen with Elegantia Events?" I smiled at my intuitive son. "Something like that, Mijo. How would you and Miles like to attend a very elegant, very important wedding with me?" Miles's eyes lit up with curiosity. "What kind of wedding? Do we know the people getting married?" "It's a very formal affair. Black tie, 500 guests, at the Grand Belmont Hotel. You'd need to wear tuxedos and be on your absolute best behavior around some very wealthy, powerful people." "Tuxedos?" Alden straightened in his chair, suddenly looking more like a young businessman than a 10-year-old. "Like at the charity galas we attend with you?" "Exactly like that, but even more formal. I need to know you can handle yourselves with complete dignity around people who might be judgmental." Miles, always more sensitive to emotional undercurrents, studied his mother's face carefully. "Mom, is this about something serious? You look like you do when you're preparing for a really important business presentation." I knelt down to their level, recognizing that my sons deserved more honesty than most children their age could handle. But Alden and Miles weren't typical children. They'd been raised in circumstances that had forced them to mature quickly. "Do you remember how I've always told you that your father chose not to be part of our lives before you were born?" Both boys nodded solemnly. "Well, this wedding is his wedding. He's getting married, and he invited us to attend." Alden's expression sharpened with understanding beyond his years. "He invited us after all this time? Why?" I said carefully, "he wants to show us how successful he's become. He probably expects us to look impressed or maybe even sad that we're not part of his life." "But we're not sad," Miles said matter-of-factly. "We have a great life. Why would we be sad about missing out on someone who didn't want us?" I felt a surge of pride at my son's emotional intelligence. "You're absolutely right, and that's exactly what I want him to see, that we're not sad, we're not struggling, and we don't need anything from him." Alden leaned forward, his dark eyes so much like Sterling's, but filled with warmth Sterling had never possessed, showing keen interest. "So this is like proving a point?" "Something like that. I want him to see who we are as a family. I want him to understand that his opinion of us was wrong." "Are you nervous?" Miles asked, always attuned to others' emotions. I considered the question. "No, sweetheart. I'm not nervous anymore. I'm ready." "Then we'll be ready, too," Alden declared with characteristic confidence. "We'll be the best dressed, most polite kids there. And we'll make you proud," Miles added, reaching for my hand. That afternoon, I closed my office early and picked up Iris for what I thought of as a reconnaissance mission. We drove to the Grand Belmont Hotel, where I had arranged to meet with the event coordinator under the pretense of considering the venue for a high-profile client event. Mrs. Chavez, Rebecca, the event coordinator, greeted us in the opulent lobby with genuine warmth. I had worked with Rebecca on several occasions, and our professional relationship had evolved into mutual respect. "Thank you for considering the Belmont for your client. Let me show you our premier ballroom. It's actually being set up for a major wedding this weekend, so you can see it at its most formal." Perfect, I thought. The ballroom was breathtaking in its opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers, silk draping in ivory and gold, and round tables set with the finest Waterford crystal and sterling silver. White orchids and roses in elaborate arrangements created stunning centerpieces, and a string quartet was rehearsing near the raised platform where the head table would be positioned. "This is the Blackwood Hayes wedding," Rebecca explained proudly. 500 guests, unlimited budget, full black tie affair. Mr. Blackwood spared no expense, ice sculptures, premium Dom Perignon champagne, and we even have the governor's security detail coordinating with our team. I nodded appreciatively while mentally cataloging every detail. The head table's elevated position would give Sterling and his bride a perfect view of the entire room and ensure that every guest would see whoever made an entrance. The curved staircase leading into the ballroom was designed for dramatic arrivals, guaranteeing that anyone descending those steps would capture everyone's attention. "The cocktail reception will be in the Rose Garden," Rebecca continued, leading us outside to a beautifully landscaped terrace overlooking the city skyline, weather permitting, of course, though the forecast looks perfect. As we toured the facilities, my strategy began to crystallize. I would arrive during the cocktail hour when guests would be mingling outdoors, giving me room to establish my presence among the crowd before the formal dinner. The entrance down that dramatic staircase would ensure maximum impact when I and the twins made our way to the ballroom. "This is absolutely stunning," Iris murmured as we concluded the tour. "Are you sure you're ready for this level of spectacle?" "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I replied with quiet conviction. The following Saturday, Iris and I embarked on what she had dubbed Operation Transformation Phase 2. Our first stop was Nordstrom, where I had an appointment with Patricia, a personal shopper I'd worked with for several important business events. "I need something absolutely spectacular," I told Patricia. "Black tie wedding guest, and I want to make an unforgettable impression. This is probably the most important entrance I'll ever make." Patricia's eyes lit up with the challenge. "What's your budget?" "Whatever it takes to be perfect," I said without hesitation. 3 hours later, we had found the ideal dress, a stunning midnight blue gown by Oscar de la Renta that hugged my figure perfectly before flowing into an elegant train. The color was sophisticated and dramatic, bringing out my dark eyes and complementing my olive skin tone beautifully. The design was unmistakably expensive and current, clearly the work of a master designer. "Mija, you look like you should be on the red carpet," Iris breathed as I emerged from the dressing room for the final fitting. "That's exactly the look I want," I replied, studying myself in the three-way mirror. This wasn't just a dress. It was armor. Confidence made visible. The twins were easier, but no less important to outfit properly. At the formal wear shop, Alden and Miles approached the task of selecting tuxedos with the seriousness of young men who understood the importance of the occasion. "Do we look like we belong at a fancy wedding?" Miles asked, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror with careful precision. "You look like young gentlemen," I replied proudly. "But remember, how you behave will be just as important as how you look." "Don't worry, Mom," Alden said confidently, standing straighter in his perfectly tailored jacket. "We know how to handle ourselves at formal events. We've been doing it for years." He was right. Thanks to the charity galas, business dinners, and cultural events I had taken them to as part of their education, both boys were comfortable in formal settings and knew how to interact with adults with appropriate respect and confidence. The week leading up to the wedding, I threw myself into preparation with the same intensity one brought to my most important business deals. I scheduled appointments with my hairstylist and makeup artist, arranged for a luxury car service, and even hired a photographer to document our preparation. I wanted pictures of this transformation. But more than the external preparations, I spent time preparing mentally and emotionally. I practiced potential conversations with Sterling, imagined various scenarios, and steeled myself for whatever reaction my appearance might provoke. "Are you nervous?" Iris asked as we sat in my living room the night before the wedding, going over final details one more time. Surprisingly, no, I replied honestly. I feel peaceful, like I'm finally getting the chance to close a chapter that's been open too long. Iris studied my face in the lamplight. "You've really changed, you know, not just since Sterling left, but even in the past few weeks since you got that invitation. You seem powerful. I considered that assessment. I think I finally understand something that took me 10 years to learn, which is, Sterling's opinion of me never mattered. It was never about whether I was good enough for him. It was about whether he was good enough for me. And the answer to that question is very clear now. Iris smiled. Those boys of yours are lucky to have you as their mother. I'm the lucky one, I said, glancing toward the stairs where Alden and Miles were sleeping. They saved me. Having something so precious to fight for made me stronger than I ever knew I could be. As we finalized the last details, I felt a deep sense of completion settling over me. Tomorrow wasn't about revenge or even vindication, really. Tomorrow was about truth, showing Sterling exactly what he'd chosen to throw away, and proving to myself that I'd not only survived his cruelty but had transformed it into something beautiful. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm. I woke early and began the process of transformation with the methodical precision of a general preparing for the most important battle of her career. The hairstylist arrived first, creating an elegant chignon that was sophisticated without being overly formal, the kind of hairstyle that whispered rather than shouted its expense. The makeup artist followed, enhancing my natural beauty with subtle glamour that would photograph beautifully under the ballroom's lighting. When it was time to dress, Iris helped me into the midnight blue gown, carefully arranging the train and adjusting the delicate shoulder straps. The dress fit like it had been made for me, highlighting every curve while maintaining perfect elegance. The jewelry was the final touch, diamond earrings I'd bought myself to celebrate Elegantia Event's 5th anniversary and a matching pendant that had been my gift to myself when the twins were accepted at St. Mary's Academy. Each piece represented a victory, a milestone achieved through my own determination. Boys, I called upstairs. Time to get ready. Alden and Miles appeared in their tuxedos, bow ties perfectly straight, hair neatly combed with just enough natural wave to look effortless. They looked so handsome and grown up that I felt tears threatening my carefully applied makeup. Do we look okay, Mom? Miles asked, a hint of nervousness finally showing. You look perfect, I said, meaning it completely. You both look like the incredible young men you're becoming. Alden straightened his shoulders, assuming the posture of confidence that came so naturally to him. Are you ready to show everyone who we are? I looked at myself and my sons in the full-length mirror one final time. The woman looking back at me bore no resemblance to the broken, desperate person Sterling had discarded 10 years ago. This woman was confident, successful, and surrounded by love. Yes, I said firmly. I'm ready. As our car service arrived precisely on time, I felt a strange sense of completion. For 10 years, I'd been building toward this moment without even knowing it. Every late night studying, every business success, every proud moment with my sons had been preparing me for this confrontation. Sterling thought he was inviting the old Ramona to witness his triumph. Instead, he was about to meet the woman I'd become in his absence and discover exactly what he'd been foolish enough to throw away. Let's go show someone what a terrible mistake looks like, I said quietly as we settled into the car. Tonight, Sterling Blackwood would learn that some people don't stay broken. Some people rebuild themselves into something stronger, more beautiful, and infinitely more valuable than what they'd been before. The Blacktown car pulled up to the Grand Belmont Hotel at precisely 7:15, fashionably late, as I had planned. Through the tinted windows, I could see elegantly dressed guests mingling on the rose garden terrace, champagne glasses catching the golden light of the setting sun. Laughter and conversation created the perfect backdrop for high society at play. Are you ready, boys? I asked, checking Alden and Miles one final time. Both twins sat straight in their seats, looking remarkably composed for 10-year-olds about to attend what was clearly the social event of the season. We're ready, Mom, Alden said with a quiet confidence that reminded me of myself before important business presentations. Remember what we practiced: firm handshakes, eye contact, and pleased to meet you when introduced to adults. Miles nodded solemnly, his more sensitive nature showing in the careful way he adjusted his bow tie. And we stay close to you. Unless you tell us otherwise, we're representing our family tonight. My heart swelled with pride. These weren't just well-behaved children. They were young gentlemen who would hold their own in any company, regardless of wealth or social status. Sterling had no idea what he'd missed by abandoning them. The driver opened our door, and I stepped out first. The midnight blue Oscar de la Renta gown flowed around me like liquid silk, and I could feel the subtle shift in energy as nearby guests noticed my arrival. I was no longer the uncertain young woman who'd once felt intimidated by fancy venues and wealthy people. Tonight, I belonged here more than most of the guests inside. Alden and Miles flanked me on either side, their matching tuxedos perfectly tailored, their bearing confident but respectful. Together, the three of us looked like what we were, a family of substance and success who had earned their place in any room. Mrs. Chavez, the maitre d' Robert, greeted me with genuine warmth and recognition. "What a pleasure to see you again. Your work on the Sinclair merger celebration was absolutely magnificent." I smiled, remembering the several high-profile events I'd coordinated at this hotel over the past 2 years. "Thank you, Robert. We're here for the Blackwood Hayes wedding. Of course, the cocktail reception is in the Rose Garden, and dinner will begin in the main ballroom at 8 o'clock. May I say, you and your young gentleman look absolutely stunning this evening." As we walked through the hotel's opulent lobby toward the garden terrace, I caught glimpses of myself and the boys in the mirrored walls. We looked like we'd stepped out of the pages of a luxury lifestyle magazine, elegant, confident, and clearly accustomed to this level of sophistication. The moment we stepped onto the terrace, I felt the ripple effect that always accompanied a truly dramatic entrance. Conversations didn't stop abruptly, but there was a subtle shift in energy, a turning of heads, and the kind of curious attention that successful, beautiful people naturally command. "My goodness," I heard a woman whisper to her companion. "Who is that stunning woman with those handsome boys? They look like they should be in a magazine." "I don't recognize them," another voice murmured. "But they're clearly somebody important. Look at that dress. That's Oscar de la Renta, if I've ever seen it." I accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter and surveyed the crowd with practiced ease. I recognized several faces from my own professional and social circles, politicians, business leaders, cultural figures I'd encountered through elegantia events or my community involvement. These were Sterling's people now, the elite circle he'd always aspired to join. What Sterling didn't realize was that many of these people were also my people now, earned through my own merit rather than marriage. "Ramona Chavez," a familiar voice called out, and I turned to see Senator Morrison's wife approaching with obvious delight. "I had no idea you'd be here. You look absolutely radiant, my dear." "Mrs. Morrison, how lovely to see you," I replied warmly. "Allow me to introduce my sons, Alden and Miles." Both boys stepped forward with perfect manners, offering polite handshakes and warm smiles that immediately charmed the older woman. "What delightful young men," Mrs. Morrison said, clearly impressed by their poise and confidence. "Are you enjoying your summer break from school?" "Yes, ma'am," Alden replied with easy confidence. "We're looking forward to starting 6th grade at St. Mary's Academy in the fall. This summer, we've been helping our mother with some of her charity events." "St. Mary's, excellent school. My grandson attends there as well." Mrs. Morrison turned back to me with curious interest. "I didn't realize you knew the bride and groom." My smile didn't waver, though I could feel the weight of careful attention from nearby guests who were clearly listening. "I have a connection to the groom from years past. I thought it would be appropriate to attend his celebration." As Mrs. Morrison moved on, I noticed more familiar faces beginning to approach, but not with the cautious curiosity I might have expected. Instead, they came with the warmth reserved for respected colleagues and friends. "Mrs. Chavez," another voice called out, and I found myself greeting Dr. Patricia Valdez, the mayor's chief of staff. "I didn't expect to see you here." "How wonderful." "Dr. Valdez, what a pleasure. I was just telling my husband about the exceptional job you did coordinating our foundation's gala last month. The logistics alone were incredible. But the way you made everyone feel welcomed and valued, that's what made the evening truly special." More introductions followed in rapid succession: the president of the Chamber of Commerce, whose annual dinner I had organized, Judge Harrison, whose daughter's wedding had been one of Elegantia event's signature successes, and 3 prominent businessmen whose corporate events I'd coordinated with flawless execution. Each interaction served to establish my presence and status among the wedding guests. To these people, I wasn't some unknown party crasher. I was Ramona Chavez, the successful entrepreneur they'd worked with professionally and come to respect personally. "Mom," Miles whispered during a brief lull in the introductions. "Everyone seems to know you and like you." "I've worked hard to build relationships in this community," I replied softly. "Tonight, that work is paying off in ways I never expected." From across the terrace, I caught sight of Sterling for the first time in 10 years. He was holding court near the fountain, surrounded by a group of men in expensive suits, all laughing at something he'd said with the kind of appreciative attention that successful, charismatic men naturally attract. At 38, Sterling was still undeniably handsome, his dark hair now showing distinguished touches of silver at the temples, his physique maintained by what were probably expensive personal trainers and carefully controlled nutrition. He wore success like a perfectly tailored suit, and his confidence bordered on the kind of arrogance that comes from never being seriously challenged. But as I watched him from across the crowded terrace, I felt absolutely nothing. No flutter of old attraction, no pang of regret or longing, no anger or bitterness. He was simply a stranger now, someone from my past who no longer had any power over my emotions or self-worth. Sterling hadn't noticed me yet, but several people in his circle had begun glancing in my direction with obvious curiosity and what looked like growing recognition. The whispered conversations were spreading through the crowd like ripples on water as word traveled about the elegant woman and her remarkable sons. "Sterling, darling." A high, breathless voice cut through the ambient conversation, and I saw Blythe Hayes approaching Sterling's group with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested she was accustomed to being the center of attention. The bride-to-be was undeniably beautiful, tall, blonde, and perfectly groomed in the way that only unlimited money and professional styling could achieve. Her pre-wedding cocktail dress was clearly designer, probably costing more than most people's monthly salary, but there was something brittle about her beauty, something that suggested it required constant maintenance and validation to sustain itself. Blythe whispered something in Sterling's ear, gesturing discreetly in my direction with the practiced subtlety of someone accustomed to social maneuvering. I watched as Sterling's expression shifted from casual attention to sharp focus, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed directly on me. The moment our gazes met across the crowded terrace, I saw Sterling's face transform completely. First, confusion, as if he was seeing a mirage, then recognition, followed by what could only be described as shock as he took in my elegant appearance and obvious comfort in these expensive surroundings. This was clearly not the broken, desperate woman he'd expected to see. This was not someone who could be dismissed or pitied. This was a woman who obviously belonged in this world of wealth and influence, who commanded respect and attention in her own right. But it wasn't until Sterling's gaze shifted to Alden and Miles, standing confidently beside their mother like young princes, that I saw true comprehension dawn in his eyes. Alden, with his strong jaw and natural authority, was unmistakably Sterling's son. The resemblance was so strong it was almost startling. The same bone structure, the same way of holding his shoulders, the same inherent confidence. Miles, gentler but equally poised, carried Sterling's distinctive features softened by my more delicate bone structure. There was no question, no possibility of doubt. These were Sterling Blackwood's children, raised to be exceptional young men, despite, or perhaps because of, his complete absence from their lives. I watched Sterling's face go visibly pale as the full implications hit him. These weren't just any children attending the wedding. These were the sons he'd rejected, the burden he'd refused to acknowledge. And they were clearly thriving, clearly loved, clearly being raised with advantages and opportunities he'd never imagined they'd have. "Holy sh*t," I heard someone near Sterling mutter, and I realized that others in his group were beginning to notice the resemblance as well. Blythe tugged on Sterling's arm, saying something that looked urgent and increasingly panicked. But Sterling seemed frozen in place, staring across the terrace at the family he'd abandoned. I decided it was time to take control of the situation. With Alden and Miles beside me, I began walking slowly across the terrace towards Sterling's group. Conversations parted before us like water, and I could feel every eye in the garden following our progress with fascination and growing understanding. "Boys," I said quietly as we approached. "I want you to meet someone who's been very important in our story, even though he wasn't part of our lives." Alden and Miles maintained their composure, but I could sense their heightened attention. They knew this moment was significant, even if they didn't fully understand all the implications. Sterling's group had gone completely silent, watching this elegant woman and her striking sons approach with obvious fascination and dawning comprehension. "Hello, Sterling," I said when we were close enough for normal conversation, my voice warm but controlled, carrying clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen over their section of the terrace. "Thank you for the kind invitation to your wedding. It's been enlightening to see how well some people have done for themselves." Sterling opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Up close, the resemblance between him and the boys was even more pronounced and undeniable. Alden had Sterling's exact jawline and the same distinctive way of tilting his head when listening. Miles had Sterling's dark eyebrows and the same elegant hands. "These are my sons," I continued smoothly, my voice carrying with perfect clarity. "Alden and Miles. Boys, this is Mr. Blackwood, the groom we came to congratulate." Both boys stepped forward with the impeccable manners I had taught them, offering polite handshakes and appropriate greetings. But I could see Sterling's hand trembling as he shook hands with Alden, his eyes searching the boy's face with growing recognition and what might have been the first stirrings of regret. How old are they?" Sterling asked, his voice thick with shock. 10, I replied calmly. "They'll be 11 in February. Twins, as you can see." The math was simple enough for everyone present to calculate instantly. 10 years ago, Sterling would have been married to me. These children would have been born during or just after our divorce. Blythe's eyes widened as she looked between Sterling and the boys, clearly beginning to understand the situation with growing horror. "Sterling," Blythe said slowly, her voice rising with disbelief. "Are these?" "Yes," I answered for him, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen over not just their group, but most of the terrace. "These are Sterling's sons. The children he chose not to be part of their lives." The silence that followed was deafening. Around them, other guests were beginning to pick up on the drama unfolding, whispered conversations spreading the revelation through the crowd like wildfire. Sterling looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Blythe appeared to be in complete shock, her perfectly made-up face frozen in an expression of horrified realization, but I felt only a deep sense of satisfaction and completion. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 10 years, not to destroy Sterling, but to show him exactly what he'd thrown away through his own cruelty and short-sightedness. "Congratulations on your wedding," I said graciously, my voice carrying across the increasingly quiet terrace. "I hope you'll both be very happy together." As I turned to walk away with Alden and Miles, I heard Blythe's voice rising behind us in what sounded like the beginning of a very public and very heated argument. The evening was just beginning, and already Sterling's perfect wedding was starting to unravel in the most spectacular way possible. If you are still listening, please help me like this video and comment number 1 below, so I know you are amazing, and I understand that you are with me throughout this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement, cheering me on. Please comment number 1 so I can recognize you, and now, listen as I continue my story. As I walked away from Sterling with Alden and Miles beside me, the elegant cocktail atmosphere of the Rose Garden began to shift into something far more intense and dramatic. Behind us, Blythe's voice was rising with each word, sharp with confusion and growing outrage. "Sterling, what is she talking about? You have children? You told me you'd never been seriously involved with anyone before me." The whispered conversations that had started around Sterling's group were spreading through the crowd like wildfire, creating an undercurrent of excitement and scandal that transformed the wedding reception into something resembling a public tribunal. I guided the boys toward a quieter section of the terrace near the fountain where we could observe without being in the direct center of attention. But even as I moved away from the confrontation, I could feel the weight of hundreds of curious gazes as word spread through the assembled guests with the speed that only truly explosive gossip could achieve. "Mom," Alden said quietly, accepting a glass of sparkling cider from a passing waiter. "That man, Mr. Blackwood, he looked like he'd seen a ghost when he saw us." "In a way, he did, Joe," I replied, watching the drama unfold across the terrace. Sometimes people are surprised by the consequences of their choices. Miles, ever the more emotionally perceptive of the twins, looked thoughtful as he studied the growing commotion around Sterling. "Are you okay? You seem different." "Strong, but different." Before I could answer, Mrs. Morrison appeared at my elbow, her face flushed with excitement and barely contained indignation. "My dear," she said in a stage whisper that carried clearly to nearby guests. "Is it true? Are those boys Sterling Blackwood's sons?" I nodded calmly, maintaining my composure despite the intensity of the moment. "Yes, they are." Mrs. Morrison's expression shifted from curiosity to genuine shock. "But I had no idea he'd been married before, and such handsome, well-mannered boys. They're clearly exceptional children." The conversation was drawing attention from other guests who were trying to look like they weren't eavesdropping, while obviously hanging on every word. "How long were you married?" asked Dr. Valdez, who had appeared as if drawn by the magnetic pull of developing scandal. 3 years, I replied evenly. "We divorced when I was pregnant with the twins." A collective gasp rose from the growing circle of listeners. Dr. Valdez's professional composure cracked as she processed the implications. "He left you when you were pregnant with twins?" "Sterling made his position very clear," I said with measured calm. "He wasn't interested in being a father." "Good Lord," breathed Judge Harrison, who had joined the growing audience. "That poor girl over there is about to marry a man who abandoned his pregnant wife and newborn children." Across the terrace, the drama was escalating rapidly. Blythe's voice had risen to a pitch that was carrying clearly across the entire garden, and Sterling looked increasingly desperate as he tried to explain or defend himself to his bride and the growing circle of shocked guests surrounding them. "You abandoned your pregnant wife?" Blythe's voice cracked with disbelief and growing hysteria. "Sterling, how could you not tell me something like this? How could you lie to me for 2 entire years?" "It's complicated," Sterling's voice carried across the crowd, sounding weak and defensive. "You don't understand the circumstances." "Complicated?" Blythe's laugh was sharp and broken. "What's complicated about being a decent human being? What's complicated about taking care of your own children?" I watched as more prominent guests began to gravitate toward the confrontation, drawn by the spectacle and clearly horrified by what they were learning about Sterling's character. Senator Morrison pushed through the crowd, his political instincts recognizing a moment of public judgment. "Is this true, Sterling? Did you really abandon your pregnant wife and children?" "They weren't. I mean, the custody situation was," Sterling was stammering now, looking around desperately for support that clearly wasn't coming. "The situation was that you called me nothing and walked away from your pregnant wife." My voice cut through Sterling's attempted explanation, carrying clearly across the increasingly quiet crowd. I hadn't moved from my position by the fountain, but my words reached every corner of the terrace. A visible shudder ran through the assembled guests as the full cruelty of Sterling's actions became clear. "You called her nothing?" Dr. Valdez's medical training was evident in the way she examined Sterling like a particularly disgusting specimen. "A pregnant woman carrying your children, and you called her nothing?" Mayor Valdez stepped forward, his political authority lending weight to his words. "Sterling, I've supported your business ventures, attended your fundraisers, considered you a friend. How could you lie to all of us about something this fundamental to your character?" "I didn't lie exactly," Sterling said desperately. I moved on. I started over." "You abandoned them!" Blythe shrieked. And now her voice was breaking with genuine emotional pain. "What kind of monster abandons his own babies? What kind of psychopath leaves a woman alone and pregnant with twins?" The crowd had grown larger and more hostile with each revelation. I could see cell phones appearing as guests began recording what was clearly going to be the scandal of the social season. Mrs. Chavez, Judge Harrison approached me with the kind of judicial gravity that commanded respect. I hope you don't mind my saying, but your sons are remarkable young men. I've been watching them handle this situation, and their composure is extraordinary. Thank you, Your Honor, I replied. They're the joy of my life. I can see why, the judge said, glancing toward the chaos surrounding Sterling with undisguised disgust. May I ask, and please tell me if I'm overstepping, but is it true that their father completely abandoned them? Sterling made it clear that he wanted no part of our children's lives, I said simply. So I raised them on my own. Judge Harrison's expression darkened with professional outrage. A man who abandons his children isn't much of a man at all in my opinion. You've clearly done an exceptional job raising them without him. Dr. Patricia Hartwell, the city's most prominent pediatrician, joined our conversation with obvious indignation. I couldn't help but overhear. Those are beautiful, well-adjusted children, and they clearly adore you. Their father really left when you were pregnant? He made his choice, I said diplomatically, though my calm demeanor was making Sterling's actions seem even more reprehensible by contrast. And clearly it was the wrong choice, Dr. Hartwell replied firmly. Those boys are exceptional, and you should be very proud of the job you've done raising them. As more guests approached to express their support and admiration, I realized that Sterling's plan to humiliate me had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Instead of appearing as the pathetic ex-wife he'd expected, I was being embraced by the very society he'd hoped to impress. The guests were seeing me as the successful, dignified woman I'd become, while Sterling was being revealed as someone capable of unconscionable cruelty toward his own family. Meanwhile, the confrontation between Sterling and Blythe was reaching a crescendo. The bride-to-be had attracted quite an audience, her voice rising with each accusation as her perfect wedding day dissolved into public humiliation. You told me I was your first real love, Blythe was saying, her perfectly styled hair beginning to come loose as she gestured wildly. You said you'd never been married before. You said you'd been waiting your whole life for someone like me. Blythe, please let me explain, Sterling began, but she cut him off with devastating fury. Explain what? That you lied to me about everything? That you have children you never mentioned? That you abandoned a pregnant woman carrying your twins? Blythe's voice broke completely. What kind of monster does that? What kind of person can look at a pregnant woman and call her nothing? I found myself feeling an unexpected moment of sympathy for Blythe. However shallow the young woman might have seemed initially, she was genuinely shocked and hurt by these revelations. She was learning in the most public way possible that the man she was about to marry was capable of cruelty beyond her imagination. Look at them, Senator Morrison said, his politician's voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd as he gestured toward me and the twins. Look at those boys, Sterling. Your sons. Look at what their mother accomplished without you. Alden stepped forward with remarkable poise for a 10-year-old, his voice clear and steady despite the chaos around them. Mr. Blackwood, he said, and the crowd quieted to hear him. My mother told us you didn't want children. She said you chose not to be part of our lives. We turned out fine without you, Miles added quietly. But his words carried like thunder in the stillness. Mom made sure we had everything we needed. We don't need anything from you now. The crowd murmured its approval, and I could see tears in several women's eyes as they watched these remarkable children defend their mother with such dignity and maturity. Children shouldn't have to be this strong, whispered Mrs. Patterson, the society matron whose opinion could make or break social reputations. They shouldn't have to protect their mother from their own father's cruelty. Blythe suddenly broke away from Sterling and walked directly over to me, tears streaming down her face, her wedding makeup ruined beyond repair. I am so sorry, she said, taking my hands in hers, her voice breaking with genuine emotion. I'm sorry for what he did to you. I'm sorry I almost married such a monster without knowing what he was capable of. You're not responsible for his choices, I replied gently, and even in my grace towards Blythe, everyone could see the fundamental kindness that Sterling had been too blind to value. Ladies and gentlemen, Blythe announced, turning to address the crowd with the kind of dramatic flair that would be talked about for years to come. There will be no wedding tonight. I cannot and will not marry a man who could look at a pregnant woman carrying his children and call her nothing. I cannot bind my life to someone with such a complete absence of basic human decency. The silence that followed was broken by a single clap from Judge Harrison. Then Dr. Hartwell joined in. Then Senator Morrison. Within seconds, the entire crowd was applauding Blythe's decision, showing their approval for her rejection of Sterling. The sound of that applause, hundreds of the city's most influential people showing their support for Blythe's decision to abandon Sterling, was devastating. I watched Sterling's face crumble as he realized that his entire social circle was not only rejecting him but celebrating his abandonment. Blythe, wait, Sterling called desperately as she began to walk away, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a symbol of his destroyed dreams. Please, we can work through this. I can change. She stopped and turned back, her face a mask of disgust and finality. Change, Sterling? You abandoned newborn babies. You left a woman alone with twins. There's no coming back from that level of cruelty. There's no redemption for what you did to your own family. As Blythe walked away, her exit marking the official end of Sterling's wedding and social standing, the crowd began to disperse. But they didn't leave quietly. Each departure was marked by a public declaration, every guest making sure their rejection of Sterling was clearly understood. Don't contact my office about those zoning permits, Senator Morrison announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. I don't do business with men who abandon their children. The Morrison endorsement is withdrawn from all your projects, added his wife with equal volume. Consider our political relationship terminated. My medical practice will no longer use your properties for our charity events, Dr. Hartwell declared. We can't be associated with someone who abandons children. The mayor's office will be reviewing all city contracts with your company, Mayor Valdez announced with the authority of public office. The people of this city deserve better than to do business with someone capable of such cruelty. One by one, the most powerful people in the city lined up to publicly reject Sterling, but not before stopping to express their admiration for me and my sons. Mrs. Chavez, you've raised remarkable children, Judge Harrison said, shaking Alden and Miles's hands with formal respect. It's clear they've had an exceptional mother who taught them dignity and strength. Thank you for your grace tonight, added Mrs. Patterson, the society matron whose approval Sterling had always craved. A lesser woman would have caused a scene or sought revenge. You've shown extraordinary character. I'd like to discuss having Elegantia Events coordinate our foundation's annual gala, Senator Morrison said, his business card appearing in my hand. After witnessing your composure and dignity tonight, I'm convinced you're exactly the kind of professional we want to work with. Sterling stood alone by the fountain where Blythe's engagement ring still lay forgotten, watching his entire life's work evaporate as the very people he'd hoped to impress rushed to embrace the family he'd thrown away. The contrast was brutal and undeniable. Ramona, surrounded by respect and admiration, while he faced nothing but disgust and abandonment. As the crowd thinned and the last of the guests departed, Sterling was left with the wreckage of his wedding, his reputation, and his future. But more than that, he was left with the inescapable knowledge of exactly what he'd lost through his own cruelty and stupidity. The woman he'd called nothing had become everything that mattered, while he had revealed himself to be exactly that, nothing. The Grand Belmont Hotel's Rose Garden had transformed from Sterling Blackwood's moment of triumph into the stage for his complete and utter destruction. As the last of the wedding guests departed, leaving behind only scattered rose petals and the echoes of his social annihilation, Sterling stood alone beside the fountain, where Blythe's engagement ring still lay forgotten on the stone patio. The silence was deafening after the chaos of the past hour. Sterling picked up the diamond ring, a 3-carat symbol of the life he'd thought he was building, and turned it over in his trembling hands. Just 2 hours ago, he'd been the groom at the social event of the season. Now he was a pariah, publicly rejected by his bride and condemned by every person whose opinion mattered in the city's business and social circles. Mr. Blackwood, a hotel employee, approached cautiously. "Sir, we need to begin cleaning up. The ballroom dinner has been cancelled." Sterling looked up at the young man, hardly recognizing his own voice when he spoke. Yes, of course. Send the bills to my office." But even as he said it, Sterling knew that his office might not exist much longer. The political and business connections he'd spent 15 years cultivating had evaporated in the span of a single evening. Senator Morrison's endorsement, Mayor Valdez's contracts, Judge Harrison's legal referrals, all gone, publicly withdrawn in front of hundreds of witnesses. 3 days later, Sterling sat in his lawyer's office, staring at a stack of documents that represented the beginning of the end. His attorney, Marcus Webb, looked uncomfortable as he reviewed the papers spread across his mahogany desk. "The Morrison family has officially withdrawn their political endorsement from all your development projects," Marcus said without preamble. "The Riverside Heights project is dead in the water without their support. The city council won't approve the zoning changes." Sterling nodded numbly. The Riverside Heights development had been his flagship project, a $50 million luxury residential complex that would have cemented his reputation as the city's premier developer. What about the other projects? Marcus consulted his notes with the grim efficiency of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "The mayor's office has announced they're reviewing all existing contracts with Blackwood Development for compliance and ethical standards. That's political speak for, we're looking for reasons to cancel everything. And Judge Harrison, he's already moved his family's legal work to Patterson and Associates, but that's not the worst part." Marcus leaned forward, his expression grave. "3 of your major investors called this morning. They're pulling out of the Jefferson Street project. They cited concerns about your personal character affecting the company's reputation." Sterling felt the room spinning around him. The Jefferson Street project was his company's largest undertaking, a mixed-use development that had required 2 years of planning and represented nearly 60% of his firm's projected revenue for the next 3 years. "How much?" Sterling asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "If Jefferson Street fails, you're looking at bankruptcy within 6 months. The investors want their money back immediately, $8.2 million. The bank is calling in your construction loans. And there's something else." Marcus hesitated, which was never a good sign from a lawyer who'd been handling sensitive matters for Sterling for over a decade. "What?" "Your ex-wife's divorce settlement is being reviewed by the state attorney general's office." "What?" "No, that's impossible. Someone, and I have my suspicions about who, filed a complaint alleging that you deliberately hid assets during the divorce proceedings 10 years ago." Sterling's blood ran cold. "That's impossible. We disclosed everything." "Did you?" Marcus's voice was sharp. "Because I've been going through the old files, Sterling, and there are some discrepancies. The Patterson account, for instance. You had a significant trust fund from your grandmother that wasn't mentioned in the settlement." The Patterson account. Sterling had completely forgotten about his grandmother's trust, $200,000 that had been sitting untouched in a separate bank managed by a family friend, part of his inheritance. He'd convinced himself it didn't count because he'd never accessed it during his marriage to Ramona. "If they can prove you deliberately concealed assets," Marcus continued, "Ramona could be entitled to half of everything you own then, plus interest and penalties. We're talking about potentially millions of dollars." Sterling slumped in his chair, understanding for the first time the full scope of his destruction. It wasn't just his current projects failing. His entire financial foundation was crumbling. 1 week later, the scandal had spread beyond the city's social circles into the business community with the devastating efficiency of a viral infection. The local newspaper Society page had run a detailed account of the wedding disaster under the headline "Prominent Developer's Wedding Cancelled After Shocking Revelations About Abandoned Family." But it was the follow-up story in the business section that truly destroyed Sterling's remaining credibility. Blackwood Development faces multiple investigations detailed the city's review of his contracts, the state's examination of his decade-old divorce settlement, and the exodus of investors and business partners who no longer wanted to be associated with his name. Sterling's phone, once constantly ringing with opportunities and invitations, had gone silent. His assistant had resigned, claiming she couldn't handle the negative attention the office was receiving. 3 of his most experienced project managers had been poached by competing firms who saw an opportunity to acquire talent at discount prices. Most devastating of all was the call from his banker, a man Sterling had considered a friend for over 8 years. "I'm sorry, Sterling," Robertson had said, his voice genuinely regretful. "But the bank's board met last night. We're calling in your loans, all of them. Robert, you know I'm good for the money. This is just a temporary setback." "It's not about the money, Sterling. It's about reputation. The bank can't be associated with someone who, well, with what happened at your wedding. Our board includes several prominent women who were there that night. They were very clear about their feelings." Sterling had hung up the phone and sat in his empty office, looking out at the city he'd once thought he owned. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. He was no longer a player in this city's power structure. He was a cautionary tale. 2 months later, the bankruptcy proceedings had been swift and merciless. Sterling sat in a small conference room in the county courthouse, signing papers that liquidated the last remnants of his business empire. His lawyer, a court-appointed attorney since Marcus Webb had declined to continue representing him, handed him document after document with mechanical efficiency. "The penthouse sold for $1.2 million, the attorney said without emotion. "After outstanding mortgages and liens, that leaves approximately $300,000. The cars have been repossessed. Your investment portfolio has been liquidated to pay creditors." Sterling signed each paper mechanically, watching his life's work reduced to a series of legal documents and financial statements. "What about the Patterson account investigation?" The attorney consulted his notes. "The state attorney general's office reached a settlement with your ex-wife's representatives. You'll be paying $850,000 in back child support and concealed assets, plus legal fees. The payment plan extends over 5 years. Nearly $1 million to Ramona, money she would probably use to expand her business or invest in her son's college fund." The irony was overwhelming. He would be paying for the success of the family he'd abandoned. "Where do I stand financially? After all debts and settlements are paid, you'll have approximately $50,000 to your name. No business assets, no real estate, no investments. You'll need to find employment." Employment. Sterling Blackwood, who had once owned a multi-million-dollar development company, who had dined with governors and senators, would need to find a job working for someone else. 6 months after the wedding, Sterling stood in the lobby of Henderson and Associates, a mid-tier real estate firm that specialized in strip mall developments and small commercial properties, exactly the kind of projects he'd once looked down on with disdain. He wore his last good suit, the only one he'd been able to keep from his former wardrobe, and carried a resume that felt like a confession of failure. "Mr. Blackwood." The receptionist's voice was professionally neutral, but Sterling could see the recognition in her eyes. Everyone in the city's real estate community knew his story by now. "I have an appointment with Mr. Henderson about the associate position." Thomas Henderson was a man Sterling had once dismissed as small-time, someone who handled the projects that weren't worth a major developer's attention. Now Sterling was hoping Henderson would give him a chance to rebuild his career from the bottom up. "Sterling," Henderson said, greeting him with the kind of cautious professionalism reserved for fallen titans. "Thank you for coming in. Please sit down." The interview was humbling in ways Sterling hadn't anticipated. Henderson asked basic questions about residential development, commercial leasing, and project management, subjects Sterling had once known intimately, but hadn't needed to think about in detail for years. He'd become so accustomed to operating at the executive level that he'd lost touch with the fundamental skills of the business. "I'll be honest with you, Sterling," Henderson said at the end of their meeting. Your experience is impressive, but your reputation is challenging. This is a small firm. We can't afford to be associated with controversy. I understand, Sterling said, hating how desperate he sounded. But I'm willing to start over. I'll take any position you have available. Henderson studied him for a long moment. There's a junior associate position open. It's basically entry-level work, property inspections, document filing, client follow-up calls. The salary is $45,000 a year. $45,000. Sterling had once spent more than that on a single vacation, but he nodded eagerly. I'll take it. One condition, Henderson said. You never mention your connection to this firm in any public context. No networking events, no industry conferences, no social media. You're here to work quietly and rebuild your professional reputation through competence, not connections. Sterling agreed, understanding that he was being offered a chance at redemption, but only if he accepted complete anonymity and professional humility. 1 year after the wedding, Sterling lived in a studio apartment across town from his former penthouse, in a building where the elevator sometimes didn't work, and the air conditioning was a luxury he couldn't always afford. His neighbors were young professionals just starting their careers, graduate students, and service workers, people who reminded him daily of how far he'd fallen. Every morning he took the bus to Henderson and Associates, where he spent his days conducting property inspections, filing documents, and making follow-up calls to clients about lease renewals and maintenance issues. The work was honest, but mundane, the kind of detailed, unglamorous labor that kept the real estate business functioning, but never made headlines. His colleagues were polite, but distant. Everyone knew who he was and what had happened to him. He was a cautionary tale walking among them. Proof that success without character was ultimately hollow and unsustainable. The hardest part wasn't the financial struggle or the loss of social status. The hardest part was the knowledge that he'd brought all of this on himself through his own cruelty and short-sightedness. Every evening as Sterling rode the bus home through the city he'd once thought he owned, he would sometimes catch glimpses of his former life, the buildings he developed, the restaurants where he'd once been a VIP, the social venues where he was no longer welcome. And occasionally, he would see news of Ramona's continued promotion and success. Her company had been featured in national business magazines. She'd opened a second office in the state capital. She'd been appointed to the mayor's Economic Development Council, the same council that had once sought Sterling's input and now refused to work with him. The woman he called nothing had become everything he'd once pretended to be: successful, respected, and genuinely valued by her community. Meanwhile, he had become exactly what he'd accused her of being: nothing. Sterling Blackwood had wanted to humiliate his ex-wife at his wedding. Instead, he had orchestrated the most complete and devastating destruction of his own life imaginable. And unlike the temporary setbacks that most people face, Sterling's fall had been so public, so tied to his fundamental character, that there would be no real recovery. He would spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what he'd thrown away and exactly what that moment of cruelty had cost him. Justice, it turned out, was far more thorough and permanent than revenge could ever be. 2 years after Sterling's wedding disaster, I, Ramona Chavez, stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new executive suite, watching the morning sun illuminate the city skyline from the 30th floor of the Meridian Tower. The bronze nameplate on the reception desk now read Elegantia Events International, Ramona Chavez, founder and CEO. What had begun as survival cooking in a studio apartment had evolved into a luxury event planning empire with offices in 4 cities and clients across 3 countries. At 38, I embodied success in ways I'd never imagined possible during those desperate early years. But more than the material achievements, what filled me with the deepest satisfaction was watching Alden and Miles flourish into remarkable young men who exceeded my highest expectations with each passing day. Mrs. Chavez, my executive assistant, Catherine, appeared in the doorway with the morning schedule displayed on a tablet. The Forbes photographer is here for your cover shoot, and the reporter from Harvard Business Review wants to confirm your interview time for this afternoon. Send the photographer to the conference room, please, and remind me, I need to leave by 3:30 for Alden and Miles's debate tournament finals. The Forbes cover story was titled "The Phoenix Rises: How Single Mothers Are Building America's Next Business Empires." I was the featured entrepreneur, profiled alongside tech innovators and Wall Street executives as one of the country's most successful self-made businesswomen. But what made my story unique wasn't just the financial success. It was the complete transformation from victim to victor, from abandoned wife to industry leader. The Harvard Business Review interview was for a case study on crisis management and reputation building. My handling of Sterling's wedding confrontation had become legendary in business schools as an example of how dignity and authenticity could triumph over attempted humiliation. "What's fascinating about your story," the Harvard professor had told me during our preliminary conversation, "is how you turned a moment of intended cruelty into the catalyst for unprecedented success. The guests at that wedding became your biggest advocates and clients." It was true. The society figures who had witnessed Sterling's public disgrace had not only embraced me personally but had actively promoted my business within their exclusive networks. Within 6 months of the wedding, Elegantia Events had coordinated 3 gubernatorial campaign events, 2 corporate merger celebrations, and the city's most prestigious charity gala. But the real transformation had come in the months that followed. As my reputation for grace under pressure spread beyond local social circles into national business networks, the Forbes photographer worked efficiently, capturing me in my element, consulting with my design team about an upcoming senator's daughter's wedding, reviewing expansion plans for the company's new West Coast office, and posing with the numerous awards that now line my office walls. "Mrs. Chavez," the photographer said as they wrapped up, "I have to ask, do you ever think about the man who tried to humiliate you at his wedding? Does he know how successful you've become?" I considered the question carefully. I'd learned to be thoughtful about discussing Sterling publicly, not out of concern for his feelings, but because I'd discovered that my success spoke louder than any words about revenge or justice. "Success isn't about proving someone else wrong," I replied. "It's about proving yourself right, about your values, your capabilities, and your vision for what your life can become." But privately, I did sometimes wonder about Sterling's current circumstances. Through the interconnected world of business and social connections, I'd heard fragments of his story: the bankruptcy, the criminal investigation into hidden assets, the fall from penthouse to studio apartment. Just last month, Iris had mentioned seeing Sterling at a bus stop downtown, looking older and smaller than I remembered. He was working for a small real estate firm now, doing entry-level work that probably paid less in a year than my company earned in a week. The mere knowledge brought me no satisfaction. Sterling's downfall felt like a separate story from my success. His consequences were the result of his own choices, while my achievements were built on entirely different foundations. At 3:15, I left my office early to attend the most important event of my day, watching Alden and Miles compete in the state championship debate tournament. At 12 years old, both twins had grown into exceptional young men, but their paths reflected their distinct personalities in fascinating ways. Alden had been elected student body president at St. Mary's Academy for the 2nd consecutive year, making him the youngest student in the school's history to hold the promotion twice. His natural charisma and ethical leadership had caught the attention of several prestigious high schools, including 2 that had already extended scholarship offers for his freshman year. Miles had won the State Middle School Creative Writing Championship and had just been accepted into Georgetown University's summer program for gifted young writers, an honor typically reserved for high school juniors and seniors. His short story about family resilience had been published in a national literary magazine and was being adapted into a short film by a local film school. But more than their individual achievements, what made me proudest was their character. The boys had grown up understanding that success without integrity was meaningless, that kindness was more important than winning, and that family loyalty was the foundation of all other relationships. The debate tournament was held at the city's most prestigious private school in an auditorium filled with parents, teachers, and academic officials. I found my seat in the front row where a small placard reserved my spot as parent of finalists Alden and Miles Chavez. The topic was economic innovation and social responsibility, and both boys were competing on different teams in the championship round. Alden argued with passionate conviction about the importance of ethical business practices, while Miles presented a nuanced analysis of how successful companies could address social inequality. Watching them debate, articulate, confident, and deeply thoughtful about complex issues, I felt overwhelmed by pride and gratitude. These young men were becoming exactly the kind of leaders the world needed: intelligent without arrogance, successful without selfishness, strong without cruelty. When the results were announced, Alden's team won first place and Miles's team took second. But what moved me most was watching the brothers congratulate each other with genuine joy, each celebrating the other's success without reservation or jealousy. "Mom," Alden said as they left the auditorium, his first-place trophy in hand. "Did you see? Miles's closing argument was incredible. He's going to be an amazing writer someday. And did you hear Alden's point about corporate responsibility?" Miles added, beaming with pride for his brother. "He's going to change how businesses think about their communities." That evening, after celebrating at the twins' favorite restaurant, I tucked Alden and Miles into bed in their beautiful home in Riverside Hills. The house had evolved over the years from a symbol of financial security into a true family sanctuary filled with photos of their adventures, awards from school achievements, and mementos from the life they'd built together. "Mom," Miles said as I kissed his forehead. "Can I ask you something I've been thinking about?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you think we would be different people if our father had stayed? Like, would we care about different things or have different values?" It was a mature question that showed Miles's developing understanding of how circumstances shape character. "That's a profound question," I replied, sitting on the edge of his bed. "I think you might be very different. You might have grown up taking certain privileges for granted, or you might not have learned to value hard work and resilience the way you do now." Alden appeared in the doorway, clearly having been listening. "I think we're lucky he left," he said with the straightforward honesty that characterized him. "Not because we don't want a father, but because we got to see how strong and amazing our mom is. If he'd stayed, we might never have learned that families can be built on love and respect instead of just existing." I felt tears prick my eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Alden continued, climbing onto the bed beside his brother, "we learned that you don't have to accept being treated badly just because someone is family. We learned that real love means supporting each other's dreams, not tearing each other down." Miles nodded seriously. "And we learned that success means being proud of who you are and what you've accomplished, not needing to make other people feel small." "When did you two become so wise?" I asked, pulling both boys close. "We had a good teacher," Miles said simply. As I turned out the lights and headed to my own room, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this moment. 12 years ago, I'd been broken, desperate, and convinced I was worthless. Tonight, I was the CEO of an international company, the mother of 2 remarkable children, and a respected leader in my community. Standing at my bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, I allowed myself to think about Sterling one more time. Somewhere out there, he was living with the consequences of his choices, alone, diminished, having lost everything he'd thought mattered. But I felt no triumph over his downfall, no satisfaction in his suffering. I felt only gratitude for the journey that had led my family to this place of complete fulfillment and joy. Sterling had tried to define me as nothing. His cruelty had forced me to discover that I was everything. Everything he'd been too blind to see, everything he'd been too foolish to value, and everything he'd been too weak to deserve. The woman Sterling had discarded no longer existed. In her place stood Ramona Chavez, successful entrepreneur, devoted mother, and living proof that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from building a life so meaningful and beautiful that their opinions become irrelevant. As I prepared for bed, I smiled at the thought of tomorrow. Alden had a student government meeting to plan a community service project. Miles had a creative writing club and a mentoring session with a local published author. And I had a consultation with an international client who wanted Elegantia Events to coordinate a charity gala that would raise money for educational scholarships for children of single mothers. Life was full, purposeful, and completely my own. I had built an empire not through cruelty or manipulation, but through determination, integrity, and love. Sterling Blackwood had called me nothing and walked away from the most precious things life had to offer. In the end, his cruelty had become the catalyst for my greatest triumphs, while his own choices had reduced him to exactly what he'd once accused me of being. Justice, I understood now, wasn't about revenge. Justice was about becoming so completely and authentically yourself that the people who tried to diminish you fade into irrelevance while you rise into everything you were always meant to be. Alden had been elected student body president at St. Mary's Academy for the second consecutive year, making him the youngest student in the school's history to hold the promotion twice. His natural charisma and ethical leadership had caught the attention of several prestigious high schools, including two that had already extended scholarship offers for his freshman year. Miles had won the state middle school creative writing championship and had just been accepted into Georgetown University's summer program for gifted young writers, an honor typically reserved for high school juniors and seniors. His short story about family resilience had been published in a national literary magazine and was being adapted into a short film by a local film school. But more than their individual achievements, what made me proudest was their character. The boys had grown up understanding that success without integrity was meaningless, that kindness was more important than winning, and that family loyalty was the foundation of all other relationships. The debate tournament was held at the city's most prestigious private school in an auditorium filled with parents, teachers, and academic officials. I found my seat in the front row where a small placard reserved my spot as parent of finalists Alden and Miles Chavez. The topic was economic innovation and social responsibility, and both boys were competing on different teams in the championship round. Alden argued with passionate conviction about the importance of ethical business practices, while Miles presented a nuanced analysis of how successful companies could address social inequality. Watching them debate, articulate, confident, and deeply thoughtful about complex issues, I felt overwhelmed by pride and gratitude. These young men were becoming exactly the kind of leaders the world needed: intelligent without arrogance, successful without selfishness, strong without cruelty. When the results were announced, Alden's team won first place and Miles's team took second. But what moved me most was watching the brothers congratulate each other with genuine joy, each celebrating the other's success without reservation or jealousy. "Mom," Alden said as they left the auditorium, his first-place trophy in hand. "Did you see? Miles's closing argument was incredible. He's going to be an amazing writer someday. And did you hear Alden's point about corporate responsibility?" Miles added, beaming with pride for his brother. "He's going to change how businesses think about their communities." That evening, after celebrating at the twins' favorite restaurant, I tucked Alden and Miles into bed in their beautiful home in Riverside Hills. The house had evolved over the years from a symbol of financial security into a true family sanctuary filled with photos of their adventures, awards from school achievements, and mementos from the life they'd built together. "Mom," Miles said as I kissed his forehead. "Can I ask you something I've been thinking about?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you think we would be different people if our father had stayed? Like, would we care about different things or have different values?" It was a mature question that showed Miles's developing understanding of how circumstances shape character. "That's a profound question," I replied, sitting on the edge of his bed. "I think you might be very different. You might have grown up taking certain privileges for granted, or you might not have learned to value hard work and resilience the way you do now." Alden appeared in the doorway, clearly having been listening. "I think we're lucky he left," he said with the straightforward honesty that characterized him. "Not because we don't want a father, but because we got to see how strong and amazing our mom is. If he'd stayed, we might never have learned that families can be built on love and respect instead of just existing." I felt tears prick my eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Alden continued, climbing onto the bed beside his brother, "we learned that you don't have to accept being treated badly just because someone is family. We learned that real love means supporting each other's dreams, not tearing each other down." Miles nodded seriously. "And we learned that success means being proud of who you are and what you've accomplished, not needing to make other people feel small." "When did you two become so wise?" I asked, pulling both boys close. "We had a good teacher," Miles said simply. As I turned out the lights and headed to my own room, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this moment. 12 years ago, I'd been broken, desperate, and convinced I was worthless. Tonight, I was the CEO of an international company, the mother of 2 remarkable children, and a respected leader in my community. Standing at my bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, I allowed myself to think about Sterling one more time. Somewhere out there, he was living with the consequences of his choices, alone, diminished, having lost everything he'd thought mattered. But I felt no triumph over his downfall, no satisfaction in his suffering. I felt only gratitude for the journey that had led my family to this place of complete fulfillment and joy. Sterling had tried to define me as nothing. His cruelty had forced me to discover that I was everything. Everything he'd been too blind to see, everything he'd been too foolish to value, and everything he'd been too weak to deserve. The woman Sterling had discarded no longer existed. In her place stood Ramona Chavez, successful entrepreneur, devoted mother, and living proof that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from building a life so meaningful and beautiful that their opinions become irrelevant. As I prepared for bed, I smiled at the thought of tomorrow. Alden had a student government meeting to plan a community service project. Miles had a creative writing club and a mentoring session with a local published author. And I had a consultation with an international client who wanted Elegantia Events to coordinate a charity gala that would raise money for educational scholarships for children of single mothers. Life was full, purposeful, and completely my own. I had built an empire not through cruelty or manipulation, but through determination, integrity, and love. Sterling Blackwood had called me nothing and walked away from the most precious things life had to offer. In the end, his cruelty had become the catalyst for my greatest triumphs, while his own choices had reduced him to exactly what he'd once accused me of being. Justice, I understood now, wasn't about revenge. Justice was about becoming so completely and authentically yourself that the people who tried to diminish you fade into irrelevance while you rise into everything you were always meant to be.